Good afternoon, you guys. Welcome back. The dine around, is this a little food coma going on? Is that what I'm sensing in this room just this moment? I just want to do a quick check-in. There was a lot of energy in this room. I got up here, I said, good afternoon. Crickets. And before I let this, hurt my feelings, I just want to check in and make sure I know what's going on. But it's, I hope you enjoyed that dine around. Salem, you showed up really, really well. I actually turned it into a progressive lunch and wound up in 4 different restaurants and loved every minute of it. It gave me a chance to see more of you out and about, and it was exciting to be able to see you there and to see the excitement from the restaurateurs that were so honored to basically shut down for you. So let's give it up for Salem and what they did for us today. It goes without saying how I left this morning's keynote feeling very excited, very optimistic. I thought Claude did a beautiful job just kind of grounding us in some truths that she acknowledged were probably already maybe known by us, but to have them surfaced again in a way that maybe we're not used to always hearing it, to feel challenged, to hear her stories, to let her show up as her authentic self and be able to just teach us again and to remind us of the importance of that. I am so grateful for Claude. I am so grateful for you being here. I am so grateful, as I said this morning and last night, for the opportunity for all of us just to be able to be here together, because this is an industry that I not only believe in and believe in the power of, but this is work I love. And I believe you do too. And I think that's what Claude kept referencing. She goes, there's something in this room. I feel something in this room. And yeah, a little bit like the family, where it's like nobody may pick on my brother but me, and there's always a weird Uncle Hank or Frank or whatever that shows up at Thanksgiving, but we're still our own family. And we show up with that certain kind of love and respect and admiration for one another, just being open, being authentic, and knowing that we have something both to contribute and we have something that we can learn from one another. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to be connected with each and every one of you, for all of us to be able to be here together in Salem, to get refreshed as we continue on this journey of doing work that really matters, creating really good jobs for Oregonians so they can provide a little better life for themselves and for those that they love. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your commitment to the travel and tourism industry and for the kind of stewarding that we're talking about, and the kind of stewarding that you've already undertaken, and the kind of stewarding you're showing an eagerness to begin investing in. I checked on the tree. We issued the challenge this morning. I started it. Lisa came in, batten cleanup, reinforced the message. She's got a goal, folks. Do not let Lisa down. If you know what's good for you, you will not let Lisa down. Her goal, did you say 500 or 550, Lisa? She's out back. There's 550 of us here. Every one of us can put something up there on that wall, making a pledge to what we want to do. Could be personal. Something you want to start doing at home, something you want to start doing in your own life. Could be something professional, something you want to begin doing at work or doing within your business. It could be both. Okay? Feel free. I went and checked the tree. We're probably about 20% of the way there. I'm guesstimating there's about 100 leaves on that tree. 96 now because I plucked 4. Because I just wanted to leave you with a little bit of inspiration about how we're doing on the tree. We will work to create more access for more people, to show up as myself to do the work, and to allow others to do the same, to uplift and support future leaders that do amazing work for our communities, to wake up every morning and really see the mountains, the sky, the earth, and to send love to them all. You got a day and a half left. Please don't disappoint, Lisa. I'd love to see more of these. I'd love to hear more of what your thoughts are, how this conference is perhaps inspiring you to go home and to begin doing something different, again, in your home, in your life, or at your workplace, whatever that opportunity may be. Now, this morning I talked about the impacts of the travel and tourism industry in Oregon. I talked about us being a $14 billion industry. And that's a huge number. In fact, if there's one thing I often hear the tourism industry criticized for, is we're really good at using really big numbers that are sometimes so big, they don't really seem real, right? It can be really hard to put your arms around $14 billion, which is why, for me, it's sometimes the memos we get back from somebody that received a grant for $1,212.79, just effusively praising the work of the commission for having this grant program to begin with, because they were able to do something in their small community that they otherwise could not have accomplished. Or we wrap up one of our destination development studios in a community somewhere in Oregon, and we'll go back in a year or two later to see how the work is going, and we hear that maybe a dozen new businesses have opened on Main Street, and this many new jobs have been created as a result of that. Those are numbers we can get our arms around. Those are numbers actually we can get pretty emotional about when you stop and think about it. I do. What I do know is this. Oregon's travel and tourism industry did not become a $14 billion industry by accident. It resulted from this industry being collaborative, being passionate, and being smart. And it proves how critical the tourism industry is to the vitality and the strength of Oregon's economy. Our charge now is to work to make it indispensable. Working collaboratively with partners and stakeholders, we can leverage and we can align our messages and resources to grow the industry's economic impact while ensuring that tourism creates positive outcomes for people and places and safeguards against any unintended consequences and impacts for Oregon's most vulnerable communities. Together, we can continue to improve our economic prosperity for all while enhancing livability of communities and protecting ecosystems to ensure that we have the resiliency and the positive social reputations that draw visitors here in the first place. This is the imperative behind our second objective of the 10-year strategic vision. Oregon respects its natural environments. Oregon's tourism industry must build a regenerative future to ensure resiliency and prosperity for the long run. An example that is both current but has also been several years in the making is our industry's work around the Dark Sky Initiative. Part of the reason that we've really embraced dark sky tourism in recent years at Travel Oregon is due to the strong alignment with the organization's destination stewardship approach. This is an approach that's seeking to balance and meet the needs of both the economic, environmental, and social cultural needs of our state, while making sure that we're working in close partnership with the destinations tourism industry and all of our stakeholders. The Dark Skies Initiative also aligns with Oregon's competitive advantages, including our agricultural and outdoor landscapes, which provide excellent settings for dark sky experiences, especially when they include overnight stays. And if you haven't seen it yet, check out the America Journal booth and check out the back page. I'll leave it there. I also want to add, though, when I think about this Dark Sky Initiative, as I mentioned, while it's been something that Travel Oregon has been working on internally for the reasons that I noted, this is something that has been vested in by many in this industry for a while as well. Because it is now today, thanks to what I will call this mighty band of tenacious volunteers down in Southern Oregon, Oregon can now claim the largest single dark sky sanctuary in the world. Similarly, there are other folks that are also working on dark sky initiatives here in Oregon and other locations. We have other places that are in that process already. For example, our very first International Dark Sky Park has already been designated. If you did not know this, and my friend from the Prineville Chamber, I'm sure, is somewhere in the room. She knows where it is. The Prineville Reservoir State Park, first Oregon park designated as a dark sky park. So there's great work that's already happening around the state. There are folks that are going to have places named dark sky places. All of this is going to matter. All of this is going to aid us in dispersing visitors throughout the state, dispersing visitors throughout the year, and making sure that we're giving them additional reason to come, because there's all these other messages that are implicit when we talk about dark skies. You think about our international visitors and why they've been telling us for decades why they love coming to Oregon. And they tell us, well, we understand Oregon has this uncrowded, unspoiled natural beauty. And now we want to choose to come and do something in this uncrowded, unspoiled, naturally beautiful place. Could be mountain biking, hiking or trekking or horsepacking, could be wine tasting, could be brew pubs, fill in the blank. Could be visiting art galleries and museums and interpretive centers. But they're drawn here because of that uncrowded, unspoiled natural beauty. Do you think having the largest dark sky sanctuary in the world is not sending an implicit message to the world that we have uncrowded, unspoiled, naturally beautiful places? So we've started to collect visitor profile data on this very work. We're curious about these folks that are participating in stargazing and dark sky viewing as part of their trip to Oregon, and it's really nice to see at this point. We've got an emerging profile that's telling us that these are indeed the type of visitors that are going to be good for Oregon. They line up beautifully with our destination stewardship approach. They care about the environmental impact of their trip. They're taking advantage of guided experiences, so they're hiring local guides to help enhance their time here in Oregon. They're supporting local businesses when they're here in the state of Oregon, and they're planning ahead using a variety of different planning tools. Now, this is just one example of how all of us, including Travel Oregon, can involve and strengthen our research acumen. At Travel Oregon, it's about improving and strengthening our research acumen to provide you, as well as us, with the means and the tools to be able to better understand and apply how tourism impacts the environment, livability, and community well-being. In other words, how to make sure that both nature and Oregon residents are both stakeholders and beneficiaries of Oregon's travel and tourism industry. To share more about how these enhanced research approaches, especially in the area of engaging with Oregon residents, please welcome to our stage Javier Parada Torres, Travel Oregon's Interim Research Manager. Javier.
They gave me. Thank you. All right. Thanks, Todd, for the introduction. Today, I'm really happy to be here to talk to you about our latest resident sentiment towards tourism study. This study is key in understanding how tourism influences our communities. We, as an industry, strive for tourism to enhance community livability. This study allows us to tell whether that's the case. And also allows us to identify community-specific pain points and to take action. This is our third version of the study that is conducted every 2 years. Past iterations have been key in Travel Oregon's shift towards stewardship approach and in informing Travel Oregon's strategic vision. There we go. In this year's edition of the study, we went above and beyond to ensure that every corner of the state was represented. And thanks to the support of our partners across the state and key Travel Oregon staff, we were able to collect record-breaking 6,800 responses for our survey. Our goal was to collect at least 30 responses per county, and we achieved that in all but 3 counties. When measuring resident sentiment, researchers tend to focus on these 4 dimensions: cultural, economic, environmental, and social. Sustainable tourism requires balance across all 4 dimensions. In other words, what we want is to see that the positive perceptions of tourism in each of these dimensions outweighs the negative perceptions. We can also combine these 4 dimensions and look at an overall perception. In Oregon's case, the overall resident sentiment perception is that benefits of tourism outweigh the costs. This is led mainly by a strong perception of positive cultural and economic impacts of tourism. A community that embraces tourism and values cultural exchange will experience exposure to diverse cultures, ideas, and people that can enrich the community's local identity, making it a more vibrant and dynamic place to live. Oregon residents certainly embody this. 75% of respondents agree that tourism encourages cultural activities, while 58% agree that tourism encourages cultural exchange. These are things that transform places into communities and enhance the local culture, thus contributing to residents' sense of belonging. On the economic dimension, increased business activities and employment opportunities derived from tourism can enhance the overall economic well-being of a community. And Oregon residents recognize this. 78% of respondents agree that tourism is important to the success of local businesses, while 69% agree that it leads to increased employment opportunities. When residents perceive that tourism is managed responsibly, emphasizing sustainable practices and strategically utilizing tourism revenue in environmental protection initiatives, it can significantly enhance community livability. There is room for growth here. 44% of respondents believe that tourism leads to increased conservation and protection of natural habitats, while 41% believe that it leads to improved opportunities for sustainable development. However, there have been positive changes in residents' perception of tourism environmental impact. I'll come back to this in a little bit. Successful tourism can foster community pride. As residents see their home attracting visitors and gaining recognition, this can lead to a sense of shared responsibility for the community's well-being. 67% of respondents agree that tourism leads to national and international recognition, while 64% agree that it leads to an improved destination image. Oregonians are proud of the communities they live in. It is no surprise that 70% of residents say that they feel a personal responsibility to represent Oregon well. So, how are we looking compared to our 2021 edition of the study? Positive perceptions are slightly lower or in line with previous results. However, perceptions of negative impacts went down significantly, which is a good thing. This translates into benefits outweighing costs across all dimensions. To me, what really stands out is that the change in environmental impact perceptions. Historically, and across the globe, perceptions of tourism environmental impacts have been negative. Our 2024 study shows that Oregon residents perceive that the benefits of tourism impacts in the environmental dimension outweigh the costs. This is largely led by a significant decrease in perception of negative environmental impacts. What this tells me is that people are taking notice of the efforts that the industry is undertaking to reduce negative environmental impacts and to coexist in a sustainable manner with Oregon communities. If you'd like to learn more about resident sentiment, we will be presenting a summary of statewide results, followed by a panel discussion with 3 resident sentiment experts tomorrow at 10 a.m. in the Sandium 6 room. I'm also happy to chat resident sentiment with anyone. Just please come say hi. And now, it is my great honor to introduce to you Dr. Len Necefer, who holds a doctorate in engineering and public policy from Carnegie Mellon University, and is the founder of NativesOutdoors, a thriving B Corp that fills a gap of indigenous talents and voices in the outdoor industry. He is an accomplished storyteller in both print and film, as well as a consultant and advocate working at the intersection of indigenous people, natural resource, and environmental policy. I am beyond grateful that he'll be sharing his wisdom with us here today. Len's films have been featured in over 40 film festivals worldwide, including the Telluride Mountain Film Festival, the Vancouver International Film Festival, and the DC Environmental Film Festival. And his writing has appeared in National Geographic, Patagonia's The Cleanest Line, The Alpinist, and more. I had a chance to chat with him very briefly before coming up here. I'm really, really impressed with the work that you do, Len. So please welcome me in giving Len a warm welcome.
This is exciting to be here. I've grown up coming to Oregon once a year, twice a year, sometimes. I have an aunt that lives in Newport, and it's a place that has really broadened my imagination and pushed me in some big ways physically that you'll get to see here in a second. But really, the work that I'm doing now with Natives Outdoors in many respects is a question that Lisa posed to me about how do we work with tribes, how do we build shared narratives and a common story with these places that we care about. Oregon is blessed with mountains, with oceans, and everything in between. And part of that also lies the 1,000 years of history of people stewarding these places since time immemorial, not thousands of years. And a large part of our work with Natives Outdoors is focusing on how do we build that shared narrative and that shared story into a future and an environment that's changing. But a little bit about me. I put on this suit about once a year. It's the same suit you see in the... so feel happy about that. I'll probably go skiing in it later this week. But I used to work in government. I have a doctorate. I did all those things. And it was good, but often what I found was that something was missing. I had gone and basically beat the Western education game and said, wow, this is great. I was in my third year of being a professor at the University of Arizona, and I said, I'm not being fulfilled in a big way. And I thought about why that was. And it came back to my grandfather. This is Henry Lee. He was a medicine man and a uranium miner. The entirety of the time that I knew him, he had a thing that he called his tail. And his tail was a portable oxygen tank that he had to carry around because when he was 40, he lost his left lung to silicosis because of the mining that he had done 20 years prior. But that didn't stop him from getting out and showing me and teaching me the landscapes that we come from. As traditional healers, knowing the landscape, knowing how to move through it is equally as important as the education that you get between the four walls of the classroom, so he said. And I realized when I was working in these different spaces between the four walls of academia, I was missing that other classroom that he had taught to me early on. I was sitting in I think this was my sophomore organic chemistry class, trained engineer, I did that whole thing. But I remember seeing our professor pull up these two slides. This is a chemical known as ergometrin. It's used to stop bleeding after childbirth. But he also pulled up the plant that was discovered in, juniper mistletoe. And I vividly remember seeing my grandpa point at it and call it datsa. And that moment stuck with me, and it clicked. That what I was learning within the four walls of the classroom also had to be supplemented by the things out in nature as well. There's this is my, I like to poke fun at academia a lot, but this is Western's knowledge's best attempt at trying to capture this idea of traditional ecological knowledge. But really what it comes down to is that this knowledge is of course scientific, but it has many other ways of knowing as well. They're spiritual or ecological, or in many cases very useful purposes that we use in our everyday life. I started diving deeper, and I was like, well, people have been moving around, there's a long story. One of the best stories that I remember from this was the story of corn. So corn started as effectively a grass that you see there, tessinote, and it was first harvested in Central America. And through selective breeding over generations, it basically became unable to be grown wildly in nature. It needed human hands to sow its seeds and to be grown. But one of the really cool things that came out of this is that you can trace trade routes through the trade of corn by looking at the genetics. So corn was first grown in Central America, and it's been found as far north as southern Canada and all the way down into South America. And that was all through people exchanging seeds from hands to hands. And I said, that's an amazing story, and that's something that I think really lies beneath us when we were outside. The next piece of that was my previous work, I spent a lot of time in Arctic Alaska. And in working with Native communities there on adapting to massive climate change and impacts that are occurring, I also got to see the ways in which people were able to live in these really harsh environments. I was just in Yellowknife, Canada a couple weeks ago, and it was -25 was the high for the entire time we were there. And I was like, man, this is hard. This is I'm a desert person, so this is kind of out of my element. But when we look at the technology that was used to move, to be out in nature in these places, we look at for example, the parka that's made from a whale's intestine, or the snowshoes, or the ice crampons, or the glacier goggles. But we find that many of these older technologies are what we use in the technologies that we move today. And in many respects, that drove that interest deeper of indigenous stories and indigenous peoples, and the knowledges that we carry in these places in many respects can give us a different insight into the world that we're living now. So I left my job, well-paying job, to make no money. But it was really by this idea of seeing the talent within Native communities. I think there's an increasing interest in how do we work with tribes, how do we work with more Native peoples, but in many respects I kind of try to reframe that question of how do we build the capacity of Native nations to chart their own course, of Native peoples to chart where they wish to see themselves in their lives. And so the work that I've been doing with Natives Outdoors and all the things that I'm going to be sharing here in a sec really is the product of all of these other people. I've just been simply the person that can get them the money. But when I look at the talent of what exists in our Native communities and the capacity to do storytelling, it's there. And I think one of the things that really we're trying to do is build that shared narrative with non-Native communities as well, because together we're writing the next chapter of what will happen on our landscapes and our waters. So this was a little interesting of how do I talk about the work that we do? And I came back to, well, let's ground it in the Navajo way of knowing. The direction east is our North Star, and we define our directions by our sacred mountains. And so these are our 4 sacred mountains. And really it begins with this idea of where do our stories come from, and our stories are embedded in the land. And so a lot of our work has been focusing on documenting the changing landscapes around us. One of the stories that I was thinking of, the Oregon story, when I mentioned that Oregon has pushed me physically in some big ways, is a couple years ago I got to spend a month with professional athletes on documenting the impacts of the Lion's Head fire that occurred around the Mount Jefferson area. And what we decided to do is that there was an interesting story here about indigenous fire management and the ways in which climate change is changing our environments. So we went and skied Mount Jefferson from a non-standard route. It ended up taking about 6 days, over 30 miles. But these were some of the photos from that place, and that really drew me further into this idea that a lot could be learned. But one of the places that, coming back into my backyard has been talking about the indigenous stories around the Colorado River and drought. Currently working on a feature-length documentary of wildlife and the connections of wildlife to the people that have been living in this region for millennia. And one of the things that's been really interesting through this story is that the ways in which that this particular river, a river is a conduit that affects millions of people in this country. And by figuring out how we can build this shared narrative and this shared vision, we're hopefully trying to increase action around this topic. But in a lot of our work, it's this idea of capacity building, and what is this? How do we empower Native communities to tell their own stories? One of the projects I've been working with, and I had a chance to talk with Javier about some of the time I've spent down in South America, has been working with indigenous communities in the Bolivian Amazon, specifically on documenting the impacts from illegal gold mining and other mining in the Amazon specifically. But more importantly, connecting them with water sports, because for many peoples that live along these rivers in the Amazon, the river is inaccessible. It's nearly impossible to get on the river, it's expensive. But when you start looking at, how do you tell the story and document the things that are happening in this river, cameras are even more expensive and more inaccessible. So we've been working to build capacity with these communities to tell their own story. And so one of the things I'm actually going to be going and putting on the river this Saturday, this suit's going to go back into storage. But really, when we look at our work, these expeditions, these times on the land inform a lot of what we do and the cultures that we come from. But really, when we look at the depths of culture and stories, it's not just about stories about the land. In creating Natives Outdoors, a big part of that was also seeing the immense talent that exists in our communities in a multitude of other realms, whether it's music or art. And we said, here's an opportunity for us to sort of blend these different ideas together and to really reach a wider audience and to tell our own story and through that. And so again, I'm trying to keep this Oregon focused. This is one of our first design projects that we worked with Roughware based out of Bend, Oregon. Yeah, right? One of the things that we addressed early on, we saw early on, is that there was a desire and a consumer demand for native designs. Cultural appropriation, I won't get too much into that, but the use of native designs without any credit of where the design comes from, the story behind it, and the thousands of years of cultural knowledge embedded in it. It's in many ways we see this as a theft from our community. But instead of calling it out and saying, this is the problem, we provided a solution. And so we've been working with companies like Roughware to build these marketing campaigns that are grounded in native stories and native designs. Part of this is also expanded into things like skis. Again, this kind of gets back into the idea of movement. Part of when we look at culture, the transmission of culture, cultures die when they don't adapt. And one of the things that we saw as important is trying to figure out different ways in which we could embed these cultural stories into different modes of movement through the outdoors, and also to different mediums. And the skis have been a fun one. I'll probably be hanging out on these in a few weeks. But one has been also looking at how do we work with different types of mediums and artists. So Navajo rug designs are the last two I showed was from our artist Verdon Key. They lend themselves really well. We began looking further of who are the other artists that are out there that are pushing the boundary. And we had an opportunity to work with Jordan Craig here on a series of art designs. She's a Cheyenne Arapaho artist based in Santa Fe that does large-scale paintings. And we worked with her on sort of threading that needle together on telling these stories about landscape and place. This is, again, I'm really excited about this one. This is the first time I'll be sharing this, but this is a product design collaboration that we're doing with Boggs. Boggs is based in Portland. And they've been a wonderful partner in this. And we partnered with a native artist out of Sitka, Alaska, Jennifer Younger, on doing a boot design that incorporates Tlingit form line design. Form line, as hopefully many of you know in this part of the world, is a dominant feature of many Pacific Northwest Native peoples. And we thought, here's a great opportunity to incorporate this design into a practical product, namely these boots. So I'll share a little bit of our film work here with Jennifer. Let's see if this works. Yes.
Everything just flows. It flows and you see balance. And that's kind of how life should be, right? You find the balance and everything should flow.
I was born into the rain, but somehow died under your sun.
So the idea was to create a pattern with the Tlingit form line ovoid that looks like little riverbed pebbles. The base of form line design is an ovoid. I figure if I can kind of share that with the world, it will draw people in to ask more questions and learn more about the art. When I'm making something, I want to make sure I'm being respectful of the art form, and I'm thinking of, would my ancestors be proud of what I'm doing?
It's a fun one, huh? So a big part of that I didn't mention is that also the native artist, the musician and the music behind that was a native artist from Sitka. And that's been fun just to connect with artists, because I'm an engineer and artists definitely think a way different way than I do. So, you know, and part of, you know, in looking in my background, you know, I've worked in federal government and I've been on the other side of the coin when it comes to federal government and tribal relations. And I think part of our work in working in the outdoors is really being native in this country is also a political identity as well, and one being racial. We have treaties with the federal government that prescribe certain rights to federal lands. Oregon has a lot of national forests, so this comes into a big question here. And part of our work, you know, this is kind of a side note and a tangent, but something that's important to consider looking into the future is that this current administration has been prioritizing this idea of tribal co-management and co-stewardship of federal lands, and that can take a lot of different forms. And part of our work has been doing research to help inform this policy and better support tribes and better support the federal government and all the stakeholders there. And so part of the work that we just wrapped up last year was with Pew Charitable Trust and focusing on this specific question of what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, and what are the things that are there. And I think especially when we're looking at driving tourism to different places, to bringing people into certain parts of nature, you know, there's this bigger question that we have to start looking at is, what are the tribe's interests here and what are the tribe's rights in these particular regions, and how do we best ensure that we don't trample on them in creating these larger plans? Happy to share that report if you want to read it. But, you know, and looking at, you know, how are we trying to change this equation and change this broader discussion, you know, one of the areas that we've been working with related to national forests has been with ski resorts. So we've had the opportunity to work with Winter Park ski resorts, and one of the things was both an art installation collaboration, but also helping them articulate and create a plan for how do they engage with the tribes who consider the ski resort basically the land that's sitting beneath their ski resort, their home. A lot of people come to these places, there's impact that happens. And outdoor rec is, you know, in many ways has its own impact, and we have to manage it accordingly. Part of this, again, is a very small step forward in building that shared vision. And so this week, these signs are going to be renaming an entire section of the resort known as Eagle Wind. Back in the early 2000s, Winter Park Ski Resort and the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes came together to rename this part of the resort with the names of the various leaders that had come and visited this area in the past few hundred years. And what we decided to do is then work with the Cheyenne and Arapaho artists to update these signs, both with the indigenous naming, but also with the visual language of the Cheyenne and Arapaho as well. So these are going to be going up, and there's going to be interpretive signs, and we really see this as an opportunity to fill in the gaps of education that we all have growing up in this country around indigenous peoples. And this last piece, again, it was kind of like, how do I talk about this work? Really, when we were looking at how do we make this engine run, this engine of Natives Outdoors, and how do we empower Native folks, it's very much a question of finances. Our communities are under-resourced and often have opportunities that are mismatched for what's actually needed in our communities. And when I started looking at where were the different opportunities to employ Native folks, to build capacity, I started looking behind the camera. There's a lot of work that's being done to diversify folks in front of the camera, but when you look on the other side, it's not reflected in the same way. But there's a large capacity gap challenge, there's a financing challenge, and we said, well, we climb mountains in the work that we do. This is another mountain that we can climb. And we saw this as an opportunity to really be able to tell our own story as well. So, and sort of building on that, I kind of laugh about this. I'm going to literally show you a commercial that you would see on TV. But for me, like, I'm not a big fan of necessarily the final product, but what made me proud about this particular piece was that we filmed Winter Park's entire commercial set for the next 2 years. And what was really awesome about that is that was our first project in which we were able to hire an entirely Native crew to film it. And ski filming, it's one thing to know how to use a camera, it's another thing to use a camera while you're skiing. So I'll just, I'll share that.
If you're out taking lift after lift until you soar above tree line, you're in, high up and in. If you're feeling like you're halfway up Everest, you're right. Well, almost right, but definitely in. If you ask everyone around you what all these peaks are, you're in. And if you're also asking about the easiest way back down, you're smart and totally in. You're in to venture out.
Yeah. But really, where we saw, where that particular commercial came out of, and Lisa actually saw this film. We made a film a couple years ago with REI and another production company out of Seattle named Wonder Camp. And this film was really unique. It's called Spirit of the Peaks. It's online if you want to watch it. But this came out of a meeting that I had with a Lakota skier. His name's Connor Ryan. He's based in Winter Park, Colorado. And he was, as a Native person, he was going to these parts and these mountains and these landscapes that his people weren't from. And in many ways, he felt like an outsider, and he didn't feel like he was doing, or giving this place the respect that he knew that he as a Lakota person would give to the places that he's from. And what came from that was this film. And one of the things to note about this film is that we worked with Wonder Camp. Wonder Camp managed the documentary side of the filming, and the Natives Outdoors side, we handled the mountain filming. And every line that was skied in this movie was climbed. There was no chairlifts, there was no helicopters, and we had to manage the safety. And Colorado and their snowpack is notorious for being like skiing in an antique shop when it comes to avalanches. And so we as a team came together and figured out where were the gaps, how could we do this safely, make sure that there were no incidents, but more importantly, get this incredible footage. And yeah, it was kind of a big endeavor, but again, you know, we climb mountains as part of our work, and so this is just another mountain to climb. Oh, why didn't it play? That's not playing. Anyways, that one's not playing, I'm sorry. But it's online, it's called Spirit of the Peaks. It's a 50-minute film, and one that we're really proud of. It's won a ton of awards. The last piece that I want to leave you with, we worked with Visit Idaho, your neighbor. A couple years ago, they came to us and asked, we want to work on a campaign with focusing on Native artists within the state. And we said, sure, that's kind of a little bit out of left field for us. Coming from Idaho, we were like, okay, sounds good. And part of that story was really interesting, is that we built this campaign focusing on Native artists, but also served a dual purpose of not only focusing on the importance of Native art within these communities, but also around cultural preservation. In many respects, the access to media and to cameras in our community is challenging, and to document the stories of our elders and the stories of our community members is something that still remains a huge gap. And so when we looked at this project, we said, hey, here's a really good opportunity to sort of do both. And we were really excited with what came out of it and the stories that came out of it. And here's that spot.
Most of the paintings kind of represent me. So a lot of my work is the medicine in a way. If I'm having a bad time or I'm thinking too much, painting's the only way that I can get myself together.
Little wheel spin and spin, big wheel turn around and around. Little wheel spin and spin, big wheels turn around and around.
I put a lot of emotion into my work and discovering of myself, of who I am. I considered myself non-binary. I had my own two-spirit community, and we had a hard time expressing ourselves. My painting feels like bringing good medicine, and this is how I can show I heal.
Little wheel spin and spin, big wheel turn around and around. Little wheel spin and spin, big wheels turn around and around. Little wheel spin and spin, big wheel turn around and around.
Oh, there it is. I don't know why that one got slipped in. We'll go into Spirit of the Peaks, and this is the last one, and I'll wrap us up. Wow, this is not working very well. Where did that one go? Anyways. Maybe? Man, it played there for a second. Anyways, I'm not going to mess with this anymore. There it is.
It haunts me at the end of the day. There's something out there all the time that's perceiving you.
Most of the paintings represent me.
You know, I'm not just going out into
A lot of my work
empty
is
space.
As long as stories are told.
There's a personality
Having a bad
to
time.
each of these places.
I'm thinking too
There's a
much.
spirit to
Painting
each of these peaks.
I can do myself better.
That's wondering, what will you do for my grandchildren? What will you do to carry on this legacy?
You get that feeling of your ancestors are with you.
They see strength.
So what does it mean to you to be a guest on these lands?
I had my own two-spirit community. And
Apologies for that. They're both playing. We'll get to the end. So really, you know, it's always interesting. I rarely talk about sort of the conglomeration of all the work that we do, and what's the bigger story for Oregon, what's the bigger story for tourism, is that really, you know, when we look at the beauty of those photos, the beauty of those stories, in many respects, those are just coming from our lenses and the way that we're seeing the world. And in many respects, there's been many historical barriers about why we haven't been able to tell our own stories. The economic marginalization that we face and the challenges why it's like hard to stand and run a business that focuses on Native peoples. And really, when I look at this room and the folks that are here, you know, I think about the role that tribal governments and tribal economies play in providing I would say the economic drivers in rural communities. Tribes across the U.S. and Oregon's also falls within this, is that tribes in many respects are some of the biggest employers in rural areas, whether that's from casinos, whether that's being from other sorts of services. And really, when we look at working with tribes, this is also this broader question of like, it can also be a driver for economic development in rural areas when we figure out how to work together, how to build these partnerships. And when we look at the power of story and what that can do and how that can shape narratives and the way that we see the world around us and how we visit places and what visitors from abroad understand these places, the depth of history that lies beneath our feet. You know, when we look at places of Europe, in Europe we think about the, 800-year-old churches and, et cetera, but that's here in our backyard as well. We have thousands of years of history right beneath our feet. And this is a place that means a lot to me. This is, we're near where I grew up. We call it Rambo Ruin, but it's an archaeological site dating back close to 1,000 years. And what's notable about it is that there's one move to get there that could kill you. There's about an 800-foot drop right off the side there. But when I look at this, there's a story here, and that story is one that I carry and where I come from. But that story is carried on by all of you now, because you see this place, you see in the stories that I just shared with you, you're going to carry on and hopefully will influence the work that we do. And we look at the future that we all share, both as Native peoples and non-Native peoples alike. We're writing it together, and really is how do we figure out how to deal with the past, but also looking at the past, but figuring out how do we use that to move into the future. So thank you so much. And I think we're doing a Q&A, so. Am I mistaken, or is there Q&A?
Nope, you're not mistaken. Does anybody have any questions for Len?
Yeah. Yeah, the question is, how do we find the people? Yeah. Well, that's a question that I had too. I still have. And in many respects, we found people that were willing to learn, and we taught them. And some of our clients always balk about, why is your overhead so high? Why are you charging so much? It's because we have to. Because if we don't invest in our people, because, you know, a lot of our communities are very economically marginalized, there's not a lot of resources or opportunities to learn filmmaking. We had to do it ourselves. We had to build that vehicle. And, you know, our idea is that when we empower one, it's not just empowering one person, because, or even that dollar, that paycheck that we give someone, that's getting split like 10 different ways when it goes back into Native communities. That knowledge is getting shared. And when we look at capacity building, you know, at its core, the talent's there. It's just the challenge is then finding the opportunities to connect it. And this is no different than the story of many rural communities, rural white communities as well. Tons of talent, not quite the opportunity. And really what we see is when you empower that one person, it then leads to these other rippling effects. That's been really cool, but very time and cost intensive. Yeah.
Here, wait for the mic. Here, can you use the mic?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, what's the call to action?
Yeah, what's the call to action for the people in this room for you?
How do I not be brusque about this? Give me your money, but no. You know, really, it's like when I look at what Idaho did with us on that, it's like, or come on, Oregon, you can do that too. Doesn't matter. And I think in building that shared vision of what tourism looks like is not always driving a people to a place, but, you know, in this case, it was about the artists and the story and the cultures that are there. I think really is like, that's the opportunity. And I think in looking at what lies in our backyard is that economic opportunities, that tribes often are these economic engines in rural areas, and we can really invest in them, but that begins with investing in people, but investing in a way that they wish to see happen. We've had too many folks kind of come in from the outside and say, we know what's best for you. We know what we want to do. Just telling you now, you should all know that, don't do that. You wouldn't like that either. But really, it's like in working in partnership of figuring out how can we best support each other is a huge thing there. We're one part of the equation. You know, we do the filmmaking stuff. And happy to share our contact if anyone wants a film made. But, you know, really when we look at our work, you know, and I would say in the work that in the folks that are here in the room, tribes can be partners, and there's ways to do it, and there's ways to make it mutually beneficial, and we've been able to demonstrate that. Any more? There's a lot of you. There's got to be a couple.
Here. Over here.
Yeah, I guess I was going to wait to ask this personally, but since you encourage us,
yeah.
I'm wondering if you have any fantastic readings on indigenous land management, specifically fire management, maybe, or something like that. Thanks.
The one that I used to be a professor, so I love these questions about books. So Braiding Sweetgrass is a New York Times bestseller. It's a great one. Robin Wall Kimmerer just has a plethora of books. She's the author of that book. To dive into, we can get into more academic-y things. But there's a number of tribes that have their creation stories in book form. So for us as Navajo, we have one called Dinepa Hanet, which is written by a guy named Paul Zobrod. those stories are really interesting because I read those stories and it's like, wow, this is like a Marvel movie, you know? It's like, it's just waiting to happen. But in many respects, like when we look at land management and that sort of thing, like that sort of element is equally as important to the science. I think sometimes the science gets way too deep into some of those questions and kind of misses the broader focus. And with a lot of Native communities, and you can see in my work, we try not to silo what we're doing, but in many ways it's building synergies and like ecosystems that can thrive together.
Thank you for speaking. What do you believe, what are some mechanizations to sprout intersectionality between white rural areas and indigenous communities?
Yeah, that's one that I constantly was like trying to figure out. Just for context, my dad's side of the family is Romanian Scottish from Detroit. My mom's Navajo. So I've kind of always been living at that intersection. And, you know, I honestly like think that there's like landscapes, like Native communities, rural areas are rich in landscape. They're rich in place, they're rich in story, they're rich in food. And I think there is a huge possibility of building shared narratives around that, you know, and thinking about where does our food come from, or, you know, where does our meat come from in the case if you're elk hunting or whatever. And there's a shared commonality around those things. And I think in some respects, that's where I really try to lean into, is looking at that, because once you quickly start talking about things like race, about politics, I mean, things can fray so quickly. But I'm building that shared commonality around why we love these places, why we live in these places, and why in some instances, you know, we are resisting the forces that might pull us to cities. I think that's really where the power and shared narrative can be built across community. And I think is one that's, I personally love. I mean, we all eat every day, right? We love good food. So that's where I would say that's where that lies. We had one more hand over here I saw, but nope. Well, I think we're good. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's a post-lunch lull.
For Len. He was such a thought, an inspiration to us all. Thank you so much, Len. So Matt and I are standing between you and the next exhibitor break and the last set of breakout sessions, but we do have a few housekeeping things to talk about, and I'm going to turn it over to Matt first.
All right, we always want to give a big shout out to our sponsors and exhibitors. They help us make this conference what it is, bring some creativity to everything that we do. So please take the next break, connect with those exhibitors. They're spread out in both hallways below us. Give them some love. There's many new exhibitors here for the first time. I think there's 9 companies that haven't been to a governor's conference before. So please connect with them. They want to hear from you. They want to share what's going on with their businesses. If you find Lisa and I after this exhibitor break, and you come and tell us 2 exhibitors, their names, something you learned about their company, we'll give you a Starbucks gift card, okay? One other thing, I mentioned the Wellness Lounge from SCP Hotels outside of this space. I'm going to be there soon. They have instructor-led yoga again at 3:30, but also that space is open for when you need to stretch, breathe, anything like that. They have a 2-night giveaway to the Salishan Lodge and an apothecary gift basket. So see Paige and Amy there and sign up for those.
And we just want to remind you guys, we have a terrific night planned for you in Mount Angel. So we have our next set of sessions from 4 to 5:15. Our first buses will depart at 5:45 at the Porte-Couture downstairs, and we will continue that heading out to Mount Angel after that. So take a minute, change your clothes, change your shoes, but just be in store for an amazing night. So thank you all and have a great break.